"You're just the housekeeper," Alexander's wife whispered, seeing her at the party. Eleanor lowered her eyes, but hours later, when she woke up beside the family CEO, she realized her life would change forever. Before we start today's story, tell me where you're watching from. Grab a coffee or get comfortable on the couch, and please don't forget to support us. All you have to do is click like, and I'll know you enjoy this kind of story. Ready? Let's begin. The Holloway mansion gleamed under the golden lights of the annual charity gala. Women in designer dresses circulated through the marble halls, while men in tuxedos discussed business over glasses of French champagne. Eleanor watched it all from a distance, discreetly organizing guests' coats in the entryway closet. At 45, she had grown accustomed to invisibility. 5 years working in that house had taught her that her place was in the shadows, ensuring everything ran perfectly without ever being noticed. Her brown hair was pulled back in a simple bun, and the grey uniform hid the curves she had learned to despise after her divorce. "Eleanor, I need you to stay late today," Victoria Holloway said, approaching in her flowing red dress. The CEO's wife had that cold, calculating beauty that intimidated anyone. "Some guests will stay for a private dinner. Can you take care of the cleanup afterward?" "Of course, Mrs. Holloway," she replied, maintaining the professional tone she had mastered for years. "Excellent. And Eleanor?" The pause was laden with condescension. "Try not to be too visible, all right? We have very important people here today." The words stung, but she only nodded. She was used to it. To these people, she was a talking piece of furniture, useful but never worthy of real consideration. The party continued its course. Alexander Holloway, the family CEO, moved among the guests with his imposing presence. At 48, he had that mature charm that made women turn their heads when he passed. Graying at the temples, an elegant bearing, a smile that sealed multi-million-dollar deals. But that night, something in his eyes was different. A sadness that only someone who knew loneliness well could recognize. Around 11 o'clock, the last guests departed. Victoria went upstairs, claiming a headache, leaving behind an epic mess of glasses, plates, and napkins scattered across 5 different rooms. Eleanor began cleaning methodically, as she always did. She collected broken glass, stacked plates, put away empty bottles. The silence of the mansion was broken only by the clinking of dishes and her muffled footsteps on the Persian rug. "You don't have to do all this alone." The voice made her jump. Alexander stood at the entrance to the living room, his tie loosened and a glass of whiskey in his hand. There was something vulnerable in his posture she had never seen before. "Don't worry, Mr. Holloway. It's my job," she replied, continuing to organize. "Your job should have ended hours ago." He approached, collecting some glasses from the central table. "Let me help." His closeness made her nervous. In 5 years, their interactions had been limited to polite greetings and work instructions. Now he was there, in his shirt sleeves, helping her as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Sir, you don't need to." "Alexander," he interrupted softly. "You can call me Alexander. I think after 5 years, we can drop the excessive formalities." They worked in silence for a few minutes. The atmosphere was charged with a strange tension, as if both were aware that something had changed in their dynamic. "Can I ask you a question, Eleanor?" He stopped organizing and looked at her directly. "Of course. Are you happy?" The question caught her completely off guard. No one had ever asked about her happiness. Not even she herself had questioned it for years. Why are you asking?" "Because I'm not," he replied with brutal honesty. "And watching you work here all these years, always quiet, always efficient, always alone, I wonder if you're also just surviving instead of living." His words touched a wound she kept carefully covered. Her eyes welled up with tears she fought to hold back. "I'm sorry," he said, noticing her discomfort. "It wasn't my intention." No, she interrupted, her voice trembling. You're right. I don't know what it's like to be happy anymore. And it was in that moment of shared vulnerability that everything began to change. The silence that followed was charged with an unexpected intimacy. Alexander placed his glass on the table and sat on the sofa, gesturing for her to do the same. Eleanor hesitated for a moment. She had never sat on the family's furniture, but something in his gaze reassured her. You know, Eleanor, sometimes I feel like we live as strangers in the same house, he began, looking at his own hands. You see me every day, but we never truly talk. And today, seeing you here working while everyone else is enjoying themselves, I realized how unfair that is. It's my job, sir. Alexander, she corrected, still uncomfortable with the intimacy. But you're much more than your job. He looked at her with an intensity that made her blush. In 5 years, I've never seen you take a day off. I've never seen you go out with friends, have visitors, or even truly smile. That's not living, it's just existing. His words echoed like a punch to the gut. It was true. Since the divorce, she had taken refuge in work, building walls around her heart to avoid getting hurt again. But it also meant she had stopped living. And you, she asked, surprising herself with her boldness, are you happy? Alexander laughed bitterly. Touché. No, I'm not. I have everything money can buy, but... He gestured vaguely around them. All of this is empty when you have no one to truly share it with. But you have your wife. Victoria and I have been strangers sharing the same house for years. She has her social engagements, I have my business. We talk about logistics, appointments, public appearances, never about dreams, fears, or what truly matters. Eleanor absorbed his words, recognizing the loneliness that had become a constant companion in her own life. There was something liberating in finally hearing someone express the feelings she had kept hidden for so long. Can I confess something? He continued. Sometimes, when I come home and see you working in the kitchen, humming softly, I imagine what it would be like to have that simplicity, that authenticity. Authenticity? She almost laughed. Sir, you don't really know me. Then tell me, who is Eleanor when she's not wearing that uniform? The question completely disarmed her. It had been so long since anyone had shown genuine interest in knowing her that she had almost forgotten who she was beneath the protective shell. She began hesitantly. I used to dream of having a small bakery. I love to bake, especially sweets. During my marriage, my ex-husband always said they were silly fantasies, that I should be more realistic. And why didn't you try after the divorce? Because he was right, I guess. Who would buy sweets from a woman like me? Overweight, without formal education, no money to invest. Her voice trailed off to a whisper. Alexander leaned forward, his expression serious. Eleanor, look at me. She obeyed reluctantly. You're not overweight. You're a real woman with real curves. And your sweets are extraordinary. I've tasted the ones you make for breakfast. They're better than any expensive bakery in the city. The tears she had held back all night finally streamed down. No one had spoken to her that way in years. With kindness, with respect, as if her opinions and feelings mattered. I'm sorry, she said, wiping her face with her hands. It wasn't my intention. Don't apologize for feeling, he said softly, offering her a handkerchief. You've held that in for a long time. They sat in silence for a few minutes, the weight of the conversation hanging between them. The mansion was completely silent, creating a bubble of intimacy that neither of them had experienced in a long time. Eleanor, he said finally, his voice lower, can I ask you something terrible? She nodded, not trusting her own voice. Would you feel less alone if you knew I feel this way every day too? The question broke her last defenses. And that's when she realized that for the first time in years, she wasn't feeling alone. The air between them shifted. There was an electric current, a connection neither of them expected to find that night. Eleanor felt her heart race when she realized he had moved closer on the sofa, their knees almost touching. "You shouldn't be talking to me like this," she whispered, but made no move to pull away. "I know," he admitted, "but it's been so long since I've had a real conversation with someone. You listen to me in a way that no one else does." Alexander reached out hesitantly, lightly touching her fingers. The simple contact sent shockwaves through Eleanor's body. It had been years since anyone had touched her with affection. "This is crazy," she said, but intertwined her fingers with his. "Completely," he agreed, but his thumb traced soft circles on the back of her hand. They looked at each other, and Eleanor saw in his eyes the same emotional hunger she felt. It wasn't just physical desire, it was the desperate need for connection, to be seen, to matter to someone. "Eleanor," he murmured, leaning slightly towards her. "No," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Your wife." "My wife hasn't come up to my room in 2 years, he confessed softly. "We sleep in separate beds, live separate lives. We're married only on paper." The revelation shocked her. To the outside world, the Holloways were the perfect couple, rich, handsome, always united at social events. "But still, I know it's complicated. I know it's wrong in many ways," he interrupted. "But for the first time in years, I'm feeling something real. You remind me of who I was before I became just a corporate title." Eleanor closed her eyes, fighting against all the voices in her head that screamed at her to leave. But there was a stronger, deeper voice that begged her to stay, the voice of the woman who had been buried under years of rejection and self-depreciation. "If I stay," she said slowly, "what happens tomorrow?" "I don't know," he replied with brutal honesty. "I just know I don't want you to leave now." Alexander raised his free hand and gently touched her face, his thumb caressing her damp cheek where tears had streamed. "You're beautiful," he said simply. "And I'm not saying that out of pity or on impulse. I'm saying it because it's true, and because someone should have told you that every day." Eleanor's last defenses crumbled. She leaned into his touch, allowing herself to feel what she had denied for so long. When he leaned in to kiss her, she didn't resist. The kiss began hesitantly, almost reverently, as if both were afraid of breaking the moment. But when she responded, deepening the contact, years of loneliness and frustration dissolved. They broke apart, only to breathe, foreheads touching, hearts pounding. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice hoarse. In response, she pulled him into another kiss, more confident this time. His hands found her waist, pulling her closer, and she allowed herself to melt into someone's arms for the first time in years. What happened next was a mixture of urgency and tenderness. It wasn't just physical desire, it was two wounded souls finding solace in each other, two people who had forgotten what it was like to be touched with affection. When they finally separated, it was already dawn. They had migrated to the guest bedroom on the first floor, away from the master bedroom where Victoria slept. Eleanor was nestled against his chest, listening to the heartbeats that had calmed. "Now what?" she whispered in the darkness. Alexander held her tighter against him. Now everything changes. But neither of them could imagine how much. Eleanor woke with the first rays of sunlight filtering through the guest bedroom curtains. For a moment, she felt disoriented, until the reality of what had happened hit her like a cold wave. She was naked, under sheets that smelled of his masculine scent, in a bed she should never have shared. Panic instantly invaded her. Beside her, Alexander still slept deeply, an expression of peace on his face that she rarely saw during the day. The morning light revealed every detail of the situation she had gotten herself into. The clothes scattered on the floor, her hair undone on the pillow. The intimacy that seemed so natural in the darkness, but now haunted her. With careful movements not to wake him, she got out of bed and put on her crumpled uniform. Each piece of clothing she put on reminded her of the reality. She was the housekeeper. He was the married boss. What had felt like a moment of genuine connection now turned into a source of terror. "My God, what have I done?" she murmured to herself, looking in the bathroom mirror. Her lips were still swollen from the kisses. There were marks on her neck she would have to hide. The woman staring back at her seemed like a stranger, vulnerable, frightened, but also alive in a way she hadn't remembered being in years. She tiptoed out of the room, heading downstairs to the kitchen to begin her tasks as if nothing had happened. Perhaps she could pretend it was all a dream, that the previous night had been merely a product of her lonely imagination. But her hands trembled as she prepared breakfast. Every sound in the house made her jump, expecting him to come down the stairs. How would she face him? What would he say? Worse still, what if his wife found out? At 7:30, Victoria came down to the kitchen, impeccable as always in her silk robe. Eleanor kept her eyes fixed on the skillet, trying to control the tremor in her hands. "Is coffee ready?" her employer asked without even looking at her. "Yes, ma'am. I left it on the tray as usual." "Excellent. Has Alexander come down yet?" No, ma'am. I haven't seen him yet today." A lie. She had left him sleeping less than an hour ago, after a night that had changed everything. Victoria picked up her cup and left, absorbed in her phone. Eleanor let out a sigh of relief, but it was short-lived. Minutes later, she heard footsteps descending the main staircase. Alexander entered the kitchen dressed for work. Impeccable suit, neat hair, confident posture. For a moment their eyes met, and she saw something that reassured her: tenderness. There was no regret in his gaze, only a tenderness that made her blush. "Good morning, Eleanor," he said softly, accepting the cup of coffee she offered with trembling hands. "Good morning, Mr. Holloway," she replied, returning to the formal address. He frowned slightly at the title but said nothing. He drank his coffee in silence while she pretended to be busy organizing the kitchen. "Eleanor," he said finally when he finished. She turned, her heart racing. "I need to talk to you. Can you come to my office when you're done here?" She nodded, not trusting her own voice. He left, leaving her alone with her panicked thoughts. It was the firing for sure. He was going to let her go to avoid future embarrassment, or worse, he was going to say it was all a mistake, that she had taken advantage of the situation. 15 minutes later, she hesitantly knocked on the office door. "Come in." The office was paneled in dark wood, with shelves lined with books and an imposing desk. Alexander stood behind it. But when he saw her enter, he walked around it and approached. "Close the door," he asked gently. She obeyed, her heart beating so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Eleanor, about last night." "Mr. Holloway, I can explain," she began hastily. "Do you regret it?" he interrupted. The direct question caught her off guard. She had expected accusations, not this vulnerability in his voice. I don't know what to say." "Just answer. Do you regret it?" She looked at him, seeing in him the same man who had held her hand so tenderly the night before. "No," she whispered, "but that doesn't change the fact that it was wrong." Alexander smiled for the first time that morning. "Then let's make it right." Eleanor blinked several times, certain she had misheard. "What do you mean?" Alexander moved closer but maintained a respectful distance. "Eleanor, what happened yesterday wasn't a mistake. It was the first time in years I felt truly connected with someone." "But you're married," she began, her voice trembling. "On paper, only on paper," he interrupted. Victoria and I have discussed divorce several times over the past 2 years. What keeps us together are just social appearances and financial complications. Eleanor shook her head, trying to process what she was hearing. That doesn't justify what we did. I'm your housekeeper. People will talk, they'll judge. And do you care what those people think? The same ones who treat you as if you're invisible? The question hit her hard. Why should she care about the opinion of people who had never respected her? It's not about them, she said, struggling to maintain her composure. It's about what's right, about my dignity. Your dignity? Alexander laughed softly. Eleanor, you have more dignity in your pinky finger than half the people who frequent this house. And last night, you showed me a version of myself I'd forgotten even existed. He sat on the edge of the desk, gesturing for her to approach. Hesitantly, she took a few steps. Look, I know this is complicated. I know there are huge obstacles. But I also know I don't want to pretend that yesterday didn't happen. And more importantly, I don't want you to keep hiding behind that uniform, pretending you don't deserve to be happy. Mr. Holloway, just Alexander, he corrected her. And please listen to me until the end. He took a deep breath. I want to separate from Victoria. I've wanted to for a long time, but I never had the courage. Yesterday you reminded me what it's like to feel something real for someone. Eleanor felt her legs go weak. You're saying that on impulse, when reality hits. The reality is that I'm 48 years old and was living an empty life. The reality is that you made me laugh genuinely for the first time in years. The reality is that when I wake up in the morning, the only thing I look forward to is seeing you in the kitchen, humming. His words completely disarmed her. She had spent so much time convincing herself she was invisible that she had forgotten what it was like to be truly seen. But what if it goes wrong? What if it's just a romantic fantasy that doesn't survive the real world? Alexander stood up and walked to the window. Then at least we will have tried to live instead of just existing. The silence stretched between them. Eleanor could hear her own heart beating, mixed with the distant sounds of the city outside. Through the window, she saw people hurrying on the sidewalk, all with places to go, purposes, lives to live. What if I told you I also don't want to pretend yesterday didn't happen? Udushi finally asked, her voice almost a whisper. He turned, his eyes shining with hope. Then I'd say you're braver than you think. I'm the overweight housekeeper who slept with the married boss, she said, trying to bring in the harshness of reality. How could that ever work? Alexander crossed the office in 2 strides and took her hands. You are Eleanor, an intelligent, caring, and strong woman who deserves to be loved for who she is. And I am Alexander, a man who'd forgotten how to smile until he truly knew you. Before she could answer, he continued, I know it's scary. I know there will be judgments, difficulties, moments when we'll question if we made the right choice. But I also know that I'd rather face all of that by your side than continue living this charade. Eleanor looked into his eyes and saw the sincerity that both frightened and attracted her. What exactly are you asking me? I'm asking for a chance. For both of us to discover if what started yesterday can turn into something real and lasting. She closed her eyes, fighting against years of insecurity and fear. When she opened them again, she had made a decision that would change everything. And how would we make it work? The days that followed were a roller coaster of emotions for Eleanor. During the day, she maintained her normal routine, cleaning, organizing, preparing meals. But now every interaction with Alexander carried an undercurrent of intimacy. Exchanged glances when Victoria wasn't around, fingers that touched discreetly when he took his coffee cup, quick whispers about meeting later. Alexander had started working later in the office, creating opportunities for private conversations. He told her about his plans to talk to Victoria about the divorce, about how he had discreetly consulted a lawyer. Eleanor, in turn, shared more about her forgotten dreams, her secret recipes, the small joys she had learned to hide. "You know she suspects something, right?" Eleanor asked one night as they organized the office together after a business meeting he had fabricated. "Victoria is so engrossed in her own activities that she barely notices I exist," Alexander replied, pulling her closer. "Yesterday she commented that I was strangely cheerful, but attributed it to the company's good results. And then they had established some unspoken rules. Nothing during the day when other people were around, meetings only in the guest bedrooms or the office, and absolute discretion. It was a dangerous game, but for the first time in years, both felt truly alive. In the third week, however, things started to get more complicated. Eleanor noticed that the morning housekeeper, Carmen, was watching her more closely, and Victoria had casually commented that she found it strange the guest bedroom sheets were being changed so frequently. "Maybe we should slow down," Eleanor suggested one night, lying on Alexander's chest after another clandestine meeting. "Why? Did someone say something?" "Not exactly, but I can feel the looks. People notice when something changes, even if they don't know exactly what." Alexander stroked her hair. "I've already scheduled the meeting with my lawyer for next week. We're going to expedite the separation process. And then we'll be able to be ourselves without hiding." The confidence in his voice both reassured and frightened her. He seemed so sure about their future, while she still fought against the internal voice that insisted it was all too good to be true. The following Saturday, Victoria announced she would spend the weekend at a spa retreat with her friends. Alexander and Eleanor exchanged glances over the breakfast table, both thinking the same thing. They would finally have real time together. "You can give Carmen the day off too," he said casually. "We won't need much service this weekend." Eleanor nodded, trying to control her nervousness. An entire weekend, just the two of them, without hiding, without rushing, without fear of being discovered. When the house finally became empty, Alexander found Eleanor in the kitchen, where she was nervously preparing lunch. "Hey," he said softly, putting his hands on her waist from behind. "Relax. We can be ourselves now." She turned in his arms, still holding a wooden spoon. "I don't know how to be myself, remember? It's been a long time. Then let's discover it together." He kissed her slowly, unhurriedly, without the constant fear of being interrupted. When they separated, she was smiling, a real smile that reached her eyes. "You know what I want to do," she said, surprising herself with her own spontaneity. "What?" "I want to cook for you. For real, not formal boss's meals. I want to make those sweets I dreamed of selling. I want to prepare food with love instead of just obligation." Alexander's face lit up. "Can I help?" The question made her laugh. The powerful CEO wants to get his hands dirty in the kitchen. The man who is falling in love with you wants to share something that makes you happy. The word love hung in the air between them. It was the first time either had used that word, and its weight hit them simultaneously. "In love?" she repeated, her voice barely coming out. "Madly," he confirmed without hesitation. "And you?" Eleanor looked into his eyes, seeing so much sincerity that it almost hurt. "Terrifyingly in love," she admitted. That's when they knew there was no turning back. What had begun as an unexpected night had turned into something much larger and deeper than either of them had imagined. Sunday morning brought a peace neither of them had experienced in years. Eleanor woke in Alexander's arms in the master suite. For the first time, he had insisted they sleep in his own bed since they had the house to themselves. "Good morning, beautiful," he murmured against her hair. "Good morning." she replied, still marveling at how natural everything felt when they didn't have to hide. They spent the morning in bed talking about everything and nothing, childhood dreams, regrets, silly jokes that made them laugh like teenagers. Alexander told her about his childhood, about how he had been pressured to take over the family business when he preferred architecture. Eleanor spoke about her failed marriage, about how she had lost confidence in herself over the years. "You know what moment changed everything for me?" she said, tracing lazy circles on his chest. "Which one?" "When you asked me if I was happy. No one had cared enough to ask in years." Alexander pulled her closer. "I care about everything about you, your fears, your dreams, what makes you smile. And you, when did you know this was more than one night?" He thought for a moment. "The next morning when you came into the kitchen trembling with nerves. I saw you trying to go back to being invisible, and I realized I couldn't live knowing I had pushed you back into the shadows." Around noon, they went downstairs to prepare lunch together. The kitchen, which had always been Eleanor's work territory, transformed into a space of intimacy. Alexander revealed himself to be surprisingly skilled with knives and spices, admitting he enjoyed cooking but never had the opportunity. "Victoria always said cooking was a servant's job," he explained while chopping onions. "And what else did she say that you believed?" Eleanor asked, observing his natural ability. The question made him pause. "Many things. That I was too serious, that I didn't know how to have fun, that I was getting old and boring. None of that is true." "How do you know?" Eleanor smiled, moving closer to him. "Because you make me laugh every day. Because you ask me about my dreams as if they matter. Because you chop onions to help me make lunch on a Sunday when you could be doing anything else." He dropped the knife and kissed her softly. "How did it take me so long to find you?" "Maybe we needed to be ready first," she replied wisely. The afternoon flew by between conversations, laughter, and moments of comfortable quiet. They watched old movies on the living room sofa, something Alexander confessed he hadn't done in years. Eleanor allowed herself to relax completely for the first time, laughing loudly, making silly comments about the movies, being herself without filters. When the sun began to set, the reality that Victoria would return the next day began to weigh on them. "I don't want to go back to hiding," Alexander said as they walked through the garden. "Neither do I. But we're not ready to face the consequences yet." "And when will we be?" Eleanor stopped and looked at him. "When you're absolutely sure you're willing to lose everything for this. Because that's what can happen. You know, your reputation, family relationships, even some businesses. And you? Are you ready for that?" "I'm ready to try to be happy, even if it's scary." Alexander pulled her into his arms, right there in the garden, with the city lights beginning to twinkle in the distance. "Then let's do this right. Tomorrow, I'm going to talk to Victoria about the divorce. No more delays, no more excuses." "Are you sure?" "I've never been so sure of anything in my life." But when Monday came, it brought with it a surprise neither of them had anticipated. Victoria returned from the spa early, and with her came news that would change everything once again. "Alexander, darling," she said as soon as she entered, with a smile Eleanor hadn't seen in months. "We need to talk. I have news that will change our lives." Eleanor's heart stopped when she saw the radiant expression on Victoria's face. It was Monday morning, and she had returned from the spa 2 hours earlier than expected, finding Alexander having breakfast in the kitchen. Eleanor was washing dishes at the sink, trying to appear busy while her muscles tensed with apprehension. "What kind of news?" Alexander asked, his voice carefully controlled. Victoria approached him with an energy Eleanor hadn't seen in years. There was something different in her posture, in the sparkle in her eyes. "I met someone," she announced bluntly. The silence that followed was deafening. Eleanor almost dropped the plate she was washing, and Alexander froze with his cup halfway to his mouth. "What do you mean? You met someone?" he asked slowly. "At the spa, well, it's complicated to explain." Victoria sat in the chair next to him with a youthful animation. "He's the owner of a vineyard in Napa Valley, California. Divorced, 2 grown children. We talked all night Saturday and..." She paused dramatically, clearly savoring the moment. "He asked me to move to California with him." Eleanor felt her legs go weak. From the corner of her eye, she saw Alexander place his cup on the table with trembling hands. "And you? What did you say?" he managed to ask. "That I need to talk to my husband first, obviously." Victoria laughed, but there was a determination in her voice that Eleanor recognized. "Alexander, let's be honest. Our marriage ended a long time ago. We are 2 strangers sharing a house out of convenience." Alexander glanced quickly at Eleanor, who kept her eyes fixed on the dishes and then back at his wife. It's true," he admitted. "I know you're not happy either," Victoria continued, surprising them with her frankness. "I've seen how you've changed in recent weeks. You're lighter, more alive. I imagined that perhaps you've also found someone..." Eleanor's heart raced. Did she know? Had she found out somehow? "Victoria," Alexander began. "You don't need to explain," she interrupted, raising her hand. "We don't want to be married anymore. We both know that for years. The difference is that now we have the courage to do something about it." Eleanor risked a look over her shoulder and saw Alexander processing the information, clearly shocked by the turn of events. "You really want to move to California?" he asked. "I want to try to be happy while I still have time," Victoria replied, with an honesty that touched even Eleanor. "Marcus makes me laugh, Alexander. When was the last time we made each other laugh?" The question hung in the air. Eleanor knew the answer. She had seen Alexander laugh genuinely for the first time in their last few weeks together. "So, what are you proposing?" Alexander asked. "An amicable divorce. No drama, no blame, no fighting over assets. We split everything down the middle and go our separate ways. I go to Napa Valley, you keep the company and this house, and we both get a chance to start over." Eleanor could barely believe what she was hearing. It was as if the universe was conspiring in their favor. "And when would you like to implement this?" Alexander asked, still processing. "As soon as possible. Marcus returns to California at the end of the month and wants me to go with him. I know it seems hasty, but sometimes the best decisions are the most spontaneous ones." Victoria stood up, clearly satisfied with the conversation. "Think about it today. We can talk to the lawyers tomorrow if you agree." She paused at the kitchen door. "Oh, and Alexander, whoever it is that's making you smile again, she's a lucky woman." And with that, she left the kitchen, leaving a stunned silence. Eleanor and Alexander looked at each other, both trying to process that the biggest obstacle to their relationship had just resolved itself in the most unexpected way possible. "Did what I think just happen?" Eleanor whispered. Alexander slowly stood up and walked to her. "I think we just gained our freedom." But both knew that now they would face the real test. If what they had was strong enough to survive in the light of day. The next few days passed in a blur of meetings with lawyers, paperwork, and surreally civilized conversations about asset division. Victoria was radiant, as if she had been freed from a prison, while Alexander navigated the process with a mixture of relief and nervousness. Eleanor observed everything from a distance, maintaining her normal routine, but feeling as if she were in a strange dream. Sometimes she caught Victoria looking at her with a curious expression, as if trying to figure something out, but she never said anything directly. "Do you think she knows?" Eleanor asked Alexander one night while they met discreetly in the office. "If she knows, She doesn't care, he replied, pulling her closer. She's so focused on her new life that she barely pays attention to what's happening here. And then, when the papers are signed, when she leaves, what happens to us? The question that haunted them was finally verbalized. Alexander held her face between his hands. What happens is we find out if this is real, if we can function as a real couple, not just a secret. I'm scared, she admitted. Me too. But the good kind of fear, you know. The fear of someone about to start an adventure. A week later, Victoria signed the final divorce papers on a sunny Thursday morning. She had packed only her most precious clothes and jewelry, leaving virtually everything behind with a lightness that surprised even herself. Take good care of him, she said to Eleanor when she passed through the kitchen to say goodbye, catching her completely off guard. Ma'am? Victoria smiled, a genuine smile, not the social smile she always wore. Eleanor, I may not have paid much attention over the past few years, but I'm not blind. I saw how you look at each other. I saw how he changed since. Well, since you found each other. Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. I didn't. Relax, Victoria interrupted gently. I'm not angry. In fact, I'm happy. Alexander deserves someone who makes him truly smile. And you deserve to be seen for who you really are. Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes. Thank you. Take care of him. He's a good man underneath all that corporate seriousness. Victoria paused. And let him take care of you too. You've spent too long taking care of everyone but yourself. With that, she left, leaving Eleanor alone in the kitchen with her heart pounding. That night, for the first time, Alexander and Eleanor dined together in the main dining room. Without hiding, without rushing, without fear, the immense table seemed ridiculously large for two people, but they laughed about it, deciding to sit side by side instead of at opposite ends. So, Alexander said, pouring wine, officially, you no longer work for me. Technically, I still work. You still need a housekeeper, Eleanor replied, but she was smiling. Actually, I have a better proposition. He stood up from his chair and, to her utter shock, knelt beside her. Alexander, what are you doing? Eleanor, he began, his voice trembling but determined. I know we've only truly known each other for a few weeks. I know this is crazy, impulsive, and probably the least sensible decision I've ever made in my life. He took a small box from his pocket, and Eleanor felt the world stop. But I also know that you make me want to be a better man, that you taught me to laugh again, to dream again, to believe I deserve to be happy. And I know I want to spend the rest of my life discovering all your secrets, supporting all your dreams, and reminding you every day how extraordinary you are. He opened the box, revealing a simple but elegant ring. Will you marry me? Eleanor looked at him, then at the ring, then back at him. Tears streamed down her face, but she was smiling. You've completely lost your mind, she said. Probably. People will talk. They'll say I'm a gold digger, that you're having a midlife crisis. Let them talk. Your friends, your family. Eleanor, he interrupted softly, are you going to marry me or not? But she looked into his eyes and saw everything she had been looking for her entire life without knowing it. Love, respect, partnership, someone who saw her for who she truly was. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will. And as he slid the ring onto her finger, both knew they had found their happy ending. 6 months later, Eleanor stood in front of the bedroom mirror she now shared with Alexander, adjusting the simple but elegant dress she had chosen for their civil wedding. It was a navy blue dress that highlighted her eyes and hugged her curves in a way that made her feel beautiful for the first time in years. Ready? Alexander asked, appearing behind her in the mirror. He was impeccable in his light grey suit, but it was the radiant smile on his face that truly made him shine. I still can't believe this is happening, she admitted, nervously adjusting his tie. Regretting it. Never. Scared? Yes. But regretting it? Never. The past few months had been a whirlwind of changes. Alexander had insisted she stop working as a housekeeper, but Eleanor had counter-proposed something better, transforming part of the mansion into a small bakery. Eleanor's Sweets had opened 3 months ago and already had a loyal clientele that even included some of the old employers who used to treat her as invisible. "You know," he said, hugging her from behind, "I still remember that night when you asked me if I was happy. And you said you weren't, and now look at us." She turned in his arms, gently touching his face. "You saved me, Alexander. Not just financially or socially, you saved me from myself." "We saved each other," he corrected. "You reminded me who I was before I became just a corporate title. You taught me that vulnerability is courage, not weakness." They married in a small, intimate ceremony at the courthouse, with only a few close people present. Carmen, who had become Eleanor's confidant, was there with tears in her eyes. Alexander's lawyer, who had become a friend during the divorce process, served as a witness. And to everyone's surprise, Victoria had sent a congratulatory letter from California, along with a bottle of wine from her new love's vineyard. "She seems happy," Eleanor commented, reading the letter after the ceremony. "Everyone deserves to find their person," Alexander replied, kissing her forehead. What impressed Eleanor most was how naturally everything had fallen into place. There were no explosive scandals or public confrontations. People talked, of course, some with malice, others with curiosity, but most simply went about their own lives. The world hadn't ended because a housekeeper married her former boss. "Can I confess something?" Eleanor said as they danced at the small reception in the mansion's garden. "Always. That first night, when you asked me if I was happy, I lied." "What do you mean?" "I said I didn't know what it was like to be happy anymore. But the truth is I did know. I was happy every morning when I saw you coming down for breakfast. I was happy when you smiled at me in a different way, as if you truly saw me. I had been in love with you for much longer than I admitted." Alexander stopped dancing and looked at her with an intensity that still made her blush. "And I was in love with the woman who hummed in the kitchen and made the whole house feel warmer just by being in it. It took me a long time to have the courage to admit it." "Well," Eleanor said, smiling, "we have the rest of our lives to be honest with each other." "The rest of our lives," he repeated, as if savoring the words. "I like the sound of that." As the sun set in the garden and guests laughed in the background, Eleanor looked around and realized she had found much more than love. She had found her own voice, her own strength, her own version of happiness. And if you enjoyed this story of second chances and love that appears where we least expect it, leave a like to motivate me to keep bringing more stories like this. Write in the comments, what part touched you the most? And if you know someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to start over, share this story. Until next time.